Alrighty, I'm hoping everybody can see our slides. Otherwise, we are flying blind. Could I just get a hands up from our lovely hands up from somebody, as long as if they can tell that you can see our slides?
Somewhere in the many people there is a hand indicated.
I'm seeing more and more hands going up, so we'll take that as a yes.
Thank you for participating.
Thank you very much.
In our troubleshoot.
Alrighty, let's get into it. So welcome to TeamsFest. I'm Loryan Strant, Microsoft MVP, product manager at InSync Technology down under in Australia. Been working with Microsoft 365 back since the BPOS days, so very, very long time.
And hi everyone, I'm Megan Strant, also a Microsoft MVP. I specialize in adoption. I'm a principal consultant of adoption at InSync Technology, and I focused on solely adoption and change management for about 10 years with Microsoft Technology. So welcome to our session for today. We are going to talk through some rapid stories and examples of Teams implementations in the last 12 months in 2020, some takeaways and some key recommendations that we've experienced this year.
So what we wanted to take through is, I guess, talking through a number of experiences that we've seen. Some of the ones that, most of them are ones we've dealt with. There's a couple. One particular one's a bit anecdotal, but we both have context in it, but we'll talk through that, and how that can be addressed, what the learnings were from it, what organizations can do to avoid it, and yeah, on with the recommendations.
This is a 40-minute session, so we've got about 7 stories, so they will be fast and punchy, but hopefully we have a consistent structure with each story, which is essentially the situation, the implementation and the solution, just to give you a range of industry, a range of experiences and hopefully maybe make you feel a bit better if you yourself had a rough Teams journey or implementation this year due to the rush that you experienced. So just to set the scene, it's 2020, COVID-19, working from home, Microsoft Teams. We're all here, we're all part of this year. No one expected everything that has begun and happened across 2020. We've experienced a year of transformation in weeks or mere months, as was indicated Ignite, but also I'm sure we've all felt it. Microsoft Teams may have enabled remote working, but it had to actually, for some companies, be enabled first. And for many of them, it was a massive urgent pressure. So this is where we've both been living and breathing the urgency and the challenges of Teams across this year.
Yes, it's been a long, hard slog, especially the first part of it. Yeah, being husband and wife and living and breathing the technology, it was a very tough few months at the start of it, as everybody was rapidly just thinking that Teams was the answer to everything.
Not quite sure if you mean those projects would have been easier if we were or we're not married. Yeah,
no, because we could talk at any time, any day. That was just great.
So when we were thinking about this session and, where we've come from and some things, reflecting on some things that have happened across the year and experiences, what actually really stood out was how rapidly things pivoted. And I'm sure a lot of people experienced it, across the start of the year. I remember in January, February, for example, being involved in some proposals and tenders, and they were 12-month roadmaps, large journeys, large budgets, slow and steady. And then there was this speed of change that happened over mere days. I was literally on site at a customer helping prepare for a launch. And I recall that one of the days I went in, there was suddenly hand sanitizer at every single meeting room. The next day when I was back in for a workshop, suddenly we were told, have a seat between you each in a meeting room. So there was starting to be social distancing. And then the next day when I was in there, they said, we're going big bang tonight. It has to happen. Everyone's going home. So there was this incredibly massive rush and change in a mere number of days.
And what we also had was, I was involved in a number of projects. Well, there we go. I was involved in a number of projects where, similar to Meg, where we were starting on a strategic piece, both around roadmap, governance, getting good adoption in place from a long-term perspective, and very rapidly customers just went, don't care about any of it, turn it on. So it went from being proper strategic approaches to, no, we don't have time, just get it in there.
And then beyond that, there was the structured approaches, phases. What could we do across the coming months? Maybe give our people some time, which turned into, as I touched on, urgent, bing, bang. We had a number of projects that said, make it live by Friday, make it live tonight. How can it happen?
And from my perspective, I love governance. I love helping people understand that it's actually not a big scary thing. And so what we had was organizations where, as I said before, we're all set to, implement proper governance around that, not just Microsoft Teams, but all of the entire Microsoft 365 stack. And it very rapidly became, what governance? We don't care. Just get it on there so people can talk remotely. That's it. We don't care.
And then finally, in my space specifically, usually there were adoption programs, what do we want to focus on this month or this quarter versus the rest of the year? And that I found with a lot of projects immediately became people can self-learn. And it may have been, we'll do a 1 hour session to get them across Teams, but then there's LinkedIn Learning, there are modules, there are videos, they'll work it out. So the support that users got just severely reduced, and it became that they were sent home and they had to deal with it. However, what was interesting with that was, I've heard the term many times, adoption by crisis. The amount of change people absorbed this year was phenomenal without us having to push them because they desperately needed it. So there was some interesting sort of different experiences as well that came with it along the way. So how did we react as an organisation and also as consultants? One thing that was particular was mid-project pivot. So, and what I meant by this point was essentially there were projects where, as we've touched on, we were planning a structured approach, and essentially it was flip it overnight. So it was amazing the pace that we had to quickly change, respond, and do what we could to, whether it be environment, platform, approach, strategy or adoption or whatever we were doing. Many of it was quick, change everything now, turn it and make it happen.
From my perspective as a product manager, I had these amazing solutions that I'd built, if I do say so myself, and all of a sudden we had customers saying, we don't care, we just want it in. So I had to face, well, how do I ensure that we still give the customer the best experience possible under the circumstances? So effectively what we did was I came up with a suite of products called Rapid Solutions. So what was roadmap was Rapid Roadmap. Governance was Rapid Governance. Live events was Rapid Live Events. Everything became rapid, and they were effectively engagements that would basically be conducted in days at the most.
And it was similar with the adoption area. We, some of the things crossed it over. Rapid Live Events became coach and deliver and help produce live events, urgently for big mass communication across organizations. But some of our 6-month programs of work, like a champions program or coaching, became 2 to 4 weeks. We were in companies just delivering, again, lightweight solutions or rapid things, and people were just opting in and uptaking what they could because they needed the help.
And the one thing that was really important for us was to make sure that we still had a focus on quality, because we stand by the work that we do. We wanted to make sure our clients have a great experience, not just because we want case studies or all references, but we actually genuinely care about the end users who are now being faced with all kinds of unprecedented scenarios for themselves. So we wanted to make sure that even though we're kind of casting aside a lot of what we care about, that whatever we're focusing on is done properly. So instead of just turning on voice, we still had some governance, even though they were just doing voice and chat. If they were just doing teamwork, then we looked at still some bits of governance around it. It was crucial to make sure that we put in place a structure for coming back in the future and not having to really clean up a gigantic mess.
All right, so let's tell some stories. So we have about 7 customer stories. As I said, we've got a bit of a consistent structure for those of you that like, to be repetitive and structured. Clearly I pushed that. And we've also, for each one, given it a bit of a rating of kind of a bit of a hot or not. So firstly, customer 1, the quick and dirty. So financial services, an organisation, which I'll throw to Loryan to talk technical first.
So they had, we were actually working through the proposal phase. I'd been in there at the start of the year, actually helping them understand what the team's journey looked like and what governance would look like. And we were literally in the middle of the proposal stage, and they had it in front of them. And we had to change it, and all of a sudden they just deployed. Things were just absolutely done. The challenge that we had was IT thought they knew what they were doing. because they'd read guidance and they'd had a day with me, and that should be enough. And the problem was that they actually didn't know what they were doing. In fact, when they implemented, they did what, they just turned Teams on. They already had Skype for Business Voice, and they were running in Islands mode straight away. Okay, fine. But then they flicked it over to Teams Onion mode, which meant we had literally no migration path available. So they had to be rolled back. They hadn't migrated to Exchange yet, so there was no calendaring integration. They hadn't migrated to SharePoint, and in fact, they actually hacked the system so that the files functionality wouldn't work by changing permissions, because they didn't want people to put files in there, but that people had OneDrive available but not deployed, so they were just putting files in OneDrive and then sharing it to the team. So it was really confusing for the end users, and it was, for us working through this, we really had to walk through it with like a machete, just cutting our way through the jungle. And yeah, just decisions were being made without really any consideration of, hi, we're experts, we're here, and you're paying us, let us help you.
So what was interesting or challenging about this project was that it was obviously reactive. It was yes, we want to engage with you as a consulting organization, but hang on, you know what, we just got to get it out there. For myself, it was a bit of a nightmare because I didn't have my expert colleagues in the midst of it with me saying, oh, hang on, are they having this feature? Is it enabled? Help me get prepared from a change perspective. I was literally hitting dead ends constantly because as soon as we would get up and running and think we're ready, they would say, whoa, the environment has meeting notes or this feature, we had, quick, let's go back to the sandpit and cut features down. They don't have them. So the quick and dirty approach, while it enabled people to rush and work from home and get it out there, was clunky, backwards and challenging. And it was stressful for the users because there was questions that weren't answered quickly enough from their internal change because they actually didn't know. So users, the speed at which they're asking questions, the answers weren't available because the platform sort of hadn't been mapped out yet.
And I think actually if you weren't husband and wife, it probably would have actually gone even worse, because Megan would ask me questions or tell me, hey, I'm training on this, or my team are doing, say, wait, what? Hang on a second, that's not going to work, or they don't have that feature. And this is where, because it was deploy teams first, do adoption first before any actual planning had been done, we actually were really trying to get in there and go, please stop, we're trying to help you and get it back on course. So
that rush created a lot of anxiety. It actually made a crisis feel like a massive crisis, flowed through everywhere, the training, the roadmap, because it wasn't there. It was just a very, very painful experience, essentially because the rush didn't have any planning and was spinning and trying to work it out while it was a fast moving train. Solution wise, there were some challenges, essentially. I'll throw to you for that one.
Well, I guess being of a certain industry type, they wanted to continue doing things the way that they knew, the way that they understood, and were not really receptive to newer ways using the newer technologies. So in fact, by sticking with older ways that they thought were more secure, they were actually more insecure from that, instead of embracing the technologies they actually had at their capability. So instead, what would have been budget for a proper deployment is actually now being spent remediating the environment, cleaning it up, retraining users and the like. So
definitely that old adage of if you don't spend it now, you'll pay for it later. And now there's a 6-month engagement. Now there's a lot more time being spent to help work through the detail. So on our scale of kind of hot or not, or we've got Mr. Bean up to the Fonz, this one we rated really, really low, quite not hot, and some poor decisions that made an entire project team, whether it be vendors, external, internal, all have quite a rough ride. Customer 2. So this one we have as the don't peak too early.
So this one is a national utility provider. There was a project manager involved who thought that Teams was just a flick of a switch, and that he could roll out technology to thousands of people because Microsoft guidance says you can flick the switch. So unfortunately, what was in there was managed services providers, people who didn't have the knowledge of what Teams was in the first place. And so it wasn't as simple as we just come in and flick the switch. We actually had barriers to overcome. They had barriers to overcome as well.
Okay, so implementation wise, In peaking too early and trying to get it all out there fast, some of the challenge were when it's rushed, conflicting opinions, but this one particularly had a massive disconnect between change and project, so much so that the project technical team actually went live to VIPs when change went aware it was happening. So I guess one of those age-old problems of change management and projects and technical being so surprising in this day and age, particularly when you're in a crisis situation. So they even turned it on, and then we found out, well, the user guides are not available because they're over here and they're under review. So massive problems in that whole kind of approach of just bang, go.
So in terms of how this was addressed was by basically pumping the brakes. And unfortunately, it took some executives getting burnt through that process and having to be rolled back. That the customer or the contacts we were working with understood what we were trying to achieve and why it was important to have a staged approach. So we effectively pulled it back to just a meetings first approach. So keep using Skype for telephony and chat, Teams for meetings, and then at least the app is installed on everyone has access to it, and then we can start lighting up functionality group by group, location by location, but at least it's there already. So that actually, and once we got that and had that proper base and approach and re-engineered it, we actually were able to then increase velocity because it was comfortable and it was all working. So on the scale of Mr. Bean to the Fonz, this had a good recovery and a good story in the end.
Definitely pausing midway to shift, get leadership buy-in, reduce velocity, and then break it down really saved this one and got things back on track. All right, customer 3, it wasn't that good.
So this is in the building sector. Another client that had plans for roadmap governance. They had plans to upgrade from Skype for Business to telephony. Telephony to Teams, upgrade meeting rooms, all those kind of things. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was similar situation, but not as bad as the financial services one before. They thought they knew what they were doing. And because IT had turned on Teams and people had started using it, they thought that everyone gets this, it's rolled out, it's fine. We don't need to do this governance stuff now, it's working. Unfortunately, what was actually the case is people had used Teams, weren't using. So there was actually about 5% usage of Teams on a daily basis, which is not good adoption. So what we actually, that particular customer actually took on a rapid solution as well. So that allowed us to focus on the quality of the solution and to clean things up, focus on just what they needed to survive so that they could, work remotely like the rest of us, and gave us the breathing space to be able to then put in place a migration plan and then come back and do the actual roadmap and governance piece properly, because they at least understood it. So similar to the utility, but we got to stop it a lot earlier.
And a key thing in here, which is I've seen explode a bit this year, is organisations relying on self-learning, training budgets getting cut, people thinking that because we can't train in person, we mustn't be able to train at all, yet we do remote training every day. Self-learning isn't always successful, and it really has to be measured to see if people are doing the thing, watching the video and having that experience and knowing what to do.
So on the scale of Mr. Bean to the Fonz, also a good result because we were able to pull it back and get it going back in the right direction again.
So fumbling in the dark situation. For those of you who maybe aren't in Australia, probably it could be a lot of you, councils or areas,
counties, I think.
Counties, areas across, whether it be the city breaking up or whether it be regional areas, have a legislative or legal or whatever requirement for compliance to continue to have a monthly meeting where council matters are addressed and the public have to be able to attend. So immediately around March, April, when everything went to working from home, we had rapidly a number of organisations or regional councils that went, we have to run a meeting this month, and we're required to, so people can dial in and attend. But it wasn't that simple. It wasn't just trigger a Teams meeting, because there are specific ways it works. We don't want 50 people from living in this area to join a meeting and speak. because it's councillors who come together to discuss and make decisions, and there's very clear structure with it. So live events was a key solution. However, you're suddenly working with a number of councillors who, a lot of them are retirees. They're older, less tech savvy, they're at home, they've got really bad Wi-Fi, and we don't even have control on the device they're on, because often they're external to the actual organisation. So the fumbling in the dark was essentially really, really muddled way to work out, pulled into a company. This is the meeting we have to run. Let's work through the use cases. We had to just make it happen. So we did a rapid program where we would educate on live events, get people, train them on live events, do a rehearsal, and produce this session. And this meeting went for 5 hours. And there were things that they talked in detail about, like, do we need to fix the roads and holes and all these things. It was a massive challenge because live events couldn't meet all their needs. Can they vote? Can they have a breakout space to deliberate and come back? So on the, I guess, hot or not meter, I would say this one, we classified it as actually still a bit low because it hasn't been solved. Thankfully, as we get new features and things changing across the year, there is more coming. Teams breakout rooms will actually help solve some stuff. But essentially, challenging project, having to work with an organisation who we couldn't actually really help their users face to face and really struggled. The tool maybe wasn't fit for purpose. We just had to do our best. So that was a massive challenge here with Teams in a specific use case.
So this particular scenario is a bank one. So I'll let you start with this one.
Sure. So this one is known as, well, that was awkward. Okay, and when we started making the slides, we actually debated this one, and we actually both have a different experience of this organisation. So from my side, there were discussions. We actually haven't been in yet, but there's been some engagement and discussions, and we're well across the situation this year. From my side, Teams was out about 2 years ago. Teams has been there, and it's had some organic growth, meaning that some people pushed for it to be enabled on their computer and use it just for specific meetings or some communication. So organic deployment, we decided to call it, no structure, unclear of the position, like there wasn't really any sort of push and drive from this is where Teams sits in the company. And so from a solution perspective, we just put that it's still unresolved. So essentially, just, I guess, positioning that so far, that overall the Teams was there, but when COVID came and everyone went to working from home, it hadn't been driven as a tool of choice for collaboration. People weren't using file libraries, and that created a lot of challenges. And in fact, when people went to working from home, because files weren't in the cloud and they had servers and a lot of challenges, some people couldn't access their files for 3 weeks. And then there became this priority groups of who could use the servers, because when everyone went in, all 3,000 staff, everything crashed all the time.
50,000.
50,000? Okay. So Teams, because they hadn't rolled it out enough to use it as a file library and be in the cloud, they didn't get the value when they needed it during a crisis.
So same organisation, my side of it, haven't been engaged, but what I actually had was a number of contacts who I know work there, who are actually personal friends, actually messaged me all excited. Oh my God, we finally got Teams, because they know of me as the Teams guy. And so they were excited about Teams. And the reason why they got Teams, as Megan said, was organic. But why they went to it and started using it was because their platforms, as Megan said, couldn't handle it. Because now they had to conference all the time instead of some of the times. So because their conferencing platform couldn't actually handle the load, effectively they just used Teams for meetings. That was pretty much it. And as soon as that system was actually then given extra capacity, they effectively abandoned it, and yeah, haven't really gone back. So if you think about it, that's not exactly a good first experience to have, oh yeah, we've used it. Yeah, it didn't really work for us, so we don't use it anymore. It's going to be very hard to go back in and, you know, tell them again, hey, let's have a look at it. It's actually a really good tool.
Obviously, during this crisis and the situation, organisations had to make decisions, and a number that we've talked about said, go for it, bring it in. It was messy, it was hard, but we made it happen. Some were a lot more positive, some just got over the line, you know, some now are in remediation. This is one that just didn't get there, and, you know, it's such a shame that they had the tool. On the hot or not meter, again, we've put this one quite low because there's still a lot of work to go for poor old Microsoft Teams.
So customer number 6, not having protection. So this was a university, and unfortunately, they'd already had Teams for several years. It was one of the ones that users were creating groups 6 months before IT knew what groups were. So you can imagine the kind of groups that were being created and the rate at which they were being created. We had talked for a number of times about governance. They were expressed interest, but didn't ever get across it. And in fact, I actually flew to that location at the start of the year and also spent a day with them talking about the governance, the need. Here's things they need to consider. Unfortunately, they continued on doing whatever they were doing, and it was being self-deployed. There was still no roadmap. There was some very light roadmap type stuff around other workloads, but nothing really around Teams. The problem was that they actually had some data leaks, and significant data leaks that were actually involving sensitive information, as you can appreciate. One of them was that some private documents about redundancies due to COVID was put into a public team, so everybody could see it. Another one was student information that was similarly put into a team that had the wrong permissions and that showed up on Delve, because that's what Delve does. And so, yeah, that was very, very concerning. It wasn't the tool that failed. It was the users not knowing how to use the tool and no structure behind it, and no management of data, no governance of the platform, as opposed to just Teams. So, yeah, that's the problem with that particular one. On the hot or not scale, really bad data leak. Really, really bad.
Final story is about cleaning up your mess. So we worked with the government department, very, very fond of this project. I was really, really deeply engaged with them right when things changed. In fact, this is the one I touched on, circling back to the start about, being there, hand sanitizer, social distancing, really in the thick of when things rapidly changed. So they, as I mentioned, that they planned a slow and steady project. We were in planning, and we were working out how to support people gradually. And then there was quite a decent training budget. So they really had all the boxes checked, making sure there's training covered and all the detail. The implementation, essentially, as things, the chaos began and the crisis, it was a case of, okay, well, design was signed off. How quickly can you build it? And when I went in each of those days, it became, we're going live tonight. It just has to happen because we don't want people coming back into the office this week. So while that was a big change and a massive shock for their people, and it was kind of, people just got to deal with it, what was great with this project was we turned around and went, okay, this is the training budget. We're not doing all this on-site support anymore. So we actually completely pivoted and turned it into a community management approach. We ran sessions. We had 50 to 100 people dialing in for training, which usually we were pretty cautious with our numbers. We let people turn up, large opt-in, and then we shift to a month-long upskill just to, keep it rapid, but the support was there. Come and drop in for questions, tips and everything. So on the hot or not meter, this one I actually think was reasonably positive. They were really, really singing our praises, saw it as a great success. Essentially, maybe the timing, because we were about to start a big phase rollout and we just went bang, rip off the Band-Aid, but it was the reinforcement and the support ongoing that people went, whoa, I don't know what to do here. Oh, but you're with me to coach me for a number of weeks. Phew, I'm going to be okay. So pretty positive. All right, so just some takeaways. Now, I feel like we've told you all the drama that's happened this year. I wanted to finish that one just then was a bit of a positive. There's been a lot of great work, probably by many people on this call and across many organisations this year, and a lot has been achieved. Some of the takeaways are that, as I just mentioned with that one, is, if you've got your ducks in a row, you can move quickly because the governance has been done. Everything's been checked. Bang, you can just do it faster, and you may be okay. But then the opposite is, even if you've got strong platform setup, if you haven't aligned your governance, your adoption, your tech, your change, all of that, it can fall apart really quickly. Like the one that was actually going hard, didn't even tell change the go live date and bring them on the journey.
Something that I'm surprised how few organizations do is have a dedicated test, dev, demo environment to practice things on. Because a lot of organizations say, well, what happens if we do this? What happens if we flick this switch? Try it and find out. And if you think about the cost of running this, and I'm not saying, just get one with an F1 license, actually pay for E3, E5, you're talking about maybe a few $100, $1,000 across a year for certainty, for knowledge, for being able to see what happens firsthand, take screenshots of it, help with adoption, understand what the impact of it is. It's a very small cost in the scheme of things.
Remember, if a tool is not fit for purpose, you'll hit a dead end. Live events is fantastic. We've both used it many times for hours, many things this year. But the council example was one where, you know what, live events didn't quite fit. So don't, keep pushing yourself and breaking yourself to use it. Understand Teams meetings, get across new features, know the options so soon when you can say everyone can be forced muted all the time. Really make sure you really understand the tech so it's fit for purpose and it really helps you kick those goals.
Don't rush governance. It has to happen. If, like Megan said, if you don't do it now, you're going to pay for it later, but it's potentially going to be worse. It's going to be a bigger cleanup. It's going to be a bigger mess to clean up. Sure, you can maybe cut some corners, focus on the, what's in front of you, but don't neglect it at all. And also don't be pigeonholed to think that just Teams governance is what you need. No, Teams is a component that sits on top of other components in a big suite of tools. So it has to be the governance of the whole thing. And
ambiguity in governance. Now it's weird that I'm talking about governance, but ambiguity in the configuration and the governance really, really impacts training. It makes sense, doesn't it? Not knowing how the environment's going to be set up. How am I supposed to train people in instruction when I don't know? Can we external share? Can they actually create a new team? What's happening in the meetings? So you really have to align it so everyone's clear and you can push strong communication to all the users.
And one of that example that I've referred to before, where if it wasn't for us being husband and wife, we wouldn't have known. And down was Megan was putting together a training pack for one of the clients and mentioned something about shared notes in meetings. I went, wait, what? No, that's turned off. But because there was no communication and there was no proper process, they didn't know it was turned off, but it was turned off. And that means that, Megan would have potentially, and her team would have trained on the wrong information and given the wrong guidance. So imagine that as a user, you're told to do it this way, but the button's not there.
Flowing on to some recommendations. So there's a lot of information in this session. We wanted to kind of go hard, hit you with a lot of stuff because some of this is going to resonate and some won't. But overall, from everything we've said, overall, don't be cheap. No, our first recommendation is don't be cheap though. Pay for that separate tenant if you can. Play in it. Do some deep testing. There are many waterfall projects where we do set up a test space in a sandpit, and we used to. So why are you not doing it in this experience, in this environment with Microsoft Office 365? Because you can.
And if you need to rush and you need to cut corners and you can't look at the governance of the whole thing, you need to focus on something, then be prepared and factor it in for the end that you are going to need to do this and actually start to plan for that. When I built all of our rapid solutions, at the same time, I built a remediation solution because I knew what was coming. And we're starting to get that with clients now where we're coming back into cleanup.
I'm not going to really go over this point a lot because I think I just said it before, but essentially just align all your streams because that's where you get success.
Working together.
A key thing though, think about there are many different types of people. They're all at a different pace. They're a different generation, different gender, different culture. There's so much variety in your end users. Don't create a single journey. Don't just rely on self-learn. People need visual content. Some need to touch and try. Some want to read a user guide. So you really need to have different modes because they'll appeal differently across your group.
And figure out what you're using. Yes, Microsoft 365 is a big suite of tools, but if you are, focusing on Microsoft Teams being the platform for calling, for meetings, for chat, shut the other ones down, provide guidance and block them because people will find ways around things. Not to say that Teams are necessarily the best at absolutely everything or SharePoint's the best at everything or that Planner's the best at everything. But if these are your tools for compliance purposes, for training purposes, shut the other ones off. It has to be done.
We've worked with a lot of organizations this year who have Microsoft Teams, WebEx and Zoom, and people are confused. People find it's different features and they're really struggling. And so organizations, it's time they need to pull the pin on some things so it's really clear and direct for your staff.
So with that, we throw to any questions. We've got our Twitters there so you can get in touch with us. Oh, it was us in case anybody needs to take a screenshot of it.
Keep the conversation going on Twitter if you're interested. Reach out to us. We hope you enjoyed our session. We hope our war stories either made you feel better because of the struggle you've had this year, or were interesting or helped give you some more things to think about. Here's a QR code, so please rate our session, give us feedback. Obviously, if it's negative, I'll blame him, but feel free to send it through anyway. And enjoy the rest of TeamsFest. And we have to say well done to the team that have organised this whole thing. It's an amazing event and you put so much work in.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming along, and thank you to the team.